For those of you that don't know me, I'm Billie Asmus. This is my mother-in-law, Amy, whom you just listened to. She was kind enough to hire me after I married her son.
Actually, it was before.
It was before that.
Dating for like 6 weeks.
Yeah, that was a big risk that she took on me. I was only dating her son for, probably like about a month, and I was in the process of moving, and Holden, I think, put a bug in her ear about hiring me, and somehow it worked out, and I'm still here, so that's a good thing. So just to kind of give you a little bit about me, I went to Bethel University in St. Paul, Minnesota. I have my degree in marketing and communication with a minor in leadership studies. A fun fact is I actually write for the Forbes Communication Council and occasionally just give my input wherever it's needed. I grew up in northern Wisconsin, only about 4 hours from the Canadian border, in a small town, Webster. It's about 600 people, so probably roughly around the same size as Wells. I definitely grew up with more trees than cornfields. It's definitely a new view being down here, but it's a new kind of beauty, I'll say that. My maiden name is Ingalls, so for those of you that are familiar with the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, Little House on the Prairie, or Little House in the Big Woods, that is a relative of mine. If you ask me afterwards, I can kind of explain the history there and how I'm related. My husband and I have a Siberian Husky, that's Bram. He is wild and energetic and fluffy in every way, but we love him. I like to say I'm a cow mom because we have about 20 cows right now, well, not including the calves. But I love my role with the cows and any of the calving that we do. It's my sense of joy in what I'm doing. It definitely brings me some satisfaction. Well, first off, I want to say everybody struggles with mental health in some way, shape, or form. It's not something that's new in this age at all. A lot of times there's a huge stigma tied with it, so it can be very hush-hush. Did you hear so-and-so is struggling with this? And we almost don't want to own up to having an issue with it. But before I was in agriculture, I actually used to work in a residential mental health treatment center. It was called Northwest Passage, and it worked with at-risk teens that were struggling with mental health. And some of these were very, very serious mental health issues. Schizophrenia was a really big one, and same with bipolar disorder. There was a lot of depression. There was a lot of girls that were dealing with bulimia and anxiety. It was really intense situations. I worked in their therapy program, and what we did is we used nature photography and writing for them to kind of cope with some of the mental health that they were dealing with. And these kids are probably the youngest between 6 and 8 years old. Some of the older ones were between 16, 17, 18, they were usually done with the program. And so what we would do is we would take these kids out into nature, to local parks, out to the lakes, and they would use photography as a way of coping with some of these issues that they were dealing with. And so these are some of the pictures that these kids took, and they're phenomenal. I mean, mind you, they had no photography skills, and we taught them the very basics and how to edit some photos. Some of them that are just phenomenal. And so some of these kids would take these photos and then they would write a journal entry or a poem and how it related to them. And it really helped them understand what was going on, and they could see themselves in some of these photos. I mean, it's amazing some of these things that they were able to capture. Really, what does that have to do with agriculture? I think the biggest thing with farmers they are phenomenal caretakers. You will see them taking care of their livestock and their crop, and they do everything in every step to make sure that their crop and their livestock are healthy and that they're safe. And unfortunately, a lot of these people don't always take the time to monitor and manage their own mental health, and so it can be kind of put to the wayside. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention suggested that these are some of the stressors that farmers tend to face and can create higher suicide rates. Social isolation, basically meaning that we live in a tight, small, knit community, and word gets around fast. There can be a lot of just social isolation when there's word get out that your neighbor might be seeking some treatment or some counseling, and there might be rumors going around. And so sometimes people can feel really isolated. and separate themselves from their peers. There's financial losses. I mean, some of you might know somebody, or maybe it was yourself, that there's combines that start on fire, or a building that burned down and there's no insurance. I mean, there's some really big financial losses that can happen. Economic failures, and unfortunately a lot of those we can't control those. There's low prices and high operation costs, and unfortunately you just kind of have to keep plugging through it. A lot of times there's barriers and an unwillingness to seek mental health. Again, with the social isolation, word gets around fast, and sometimes it can be really embarrassing to admit that you need help. The other thing is, with the small communities, there might not always be help available or places that you can go to seek that help, and so there's going to be barriers in being able to find where you can go to get that necessary help. Livestock health, we have a cow-calf operation, and yeah, you know, a calf gets sick or a cow, you know, gets hurt and you have to put them down, and a lot of people are like, well, that's the life of farming, and it is, but that doesn't mean it doesn't affect you emotionally. It definitely can. Especially women, I mean, sometimes there's just more emotional ties there than you want there to be, but I mean, I'm still crying, you know, when we gotta put a cow down. It's hard. Another huge stressor is working with family. Family farms, everybody's working together, and sometimes you have to figure out how to separate work from family and everything in between. You have to figure out where your role is and who takes care of what, and being able to find that balance and where your expertise really is. So another study done by the CDC in 2016 said that rates for agriculture workers in 17 states was nearly 5 times higher compared to that of the general population. And believe it or not, they believe that there is actually an unknown number of farmers because a lot of them disguise suicide as farm accidents. And farmers have access to some really lethal means, whether that's pharmaceuticals for your livestock, farm chemicals, there's heavy equipment, and there's firearms. They have easy access to some of these means. Believe it or not, I found this through the CDC, and it honestly kind of crushed me, but farmers take their lives more often than people of any other occupation in this country, including the military. And that's too high. That's way too high of a number to be able to hear that farmers are taking their lives because of financial loss or just situations on the farm that they don't know how to properly deal with. So some of the warning signs, which I'm sure some of you are familiar, I'm sure you hear of these situations in general, but I'm gonna go over them anyway. The biggest thing you want to look for is a trigger that could set off these symptoms. So any change in a schedule, there's a painful life event or loss on the farm, whether that is financial or a passing of a family member. Watch for those changes in your schedule because it can trigger some really hard things in somebody's life that you might not always notice. A lot of times people are gonna become depressed and uninterested in their daily schedules and routine. Some people might have the I'm angry at the world mentality. It is everybody else's fault but mine. Prices are low, so that's why I'm depressed, and you know, it's not my fault, it's somebody else's. Anxiety, the constant state and fear of unknown, like what if this happens or what if that happens? I can't control it. Some people might just kind of have the I don't care anymore. I don't want to get up and feed my cattle, you know, just let them starve to death. Who cares? You know, who cares if there's weeds sprouting up all over the place? I don't care anymore. It's just recognizing those symptoms. And then, of course, there's going to be some classic symptoms, the change in sleep patterns, the change in appetite, lack of energy, just hopelessness or guilt. Sometimes they might even feel physical aches and pains. And drug and alcohol abuse, especially in small towns, we see it a lot. So overcoming the stigma, one of the biggest steps is really just admitting it's a problem. You just got to tell yourself, if it's you that's the one that's struggling with it, you have to tell yourself, okay, I know this is a problem and I know I need to get help with it. Then tell somebody else about it. Tell your spouse, tell a sibling, tell a pastor, come in and tell one of our agronomists. I mean, they're all farmers too. They understand the hardship that comes with farming, and they'll be there to listen to you. That's their job, is to listen to you and help you with your operation. And sometimes that could include this. The next thing is just being able to get help. Like I said, some people might be really reluctant to and wanting to admit that they need counseling or that they need therapy, but it can really, really provide some relief and help you identify what's really going on underneath. The other thing is take responsibility. Is a lot of times it can be very easy to blame somebody else or the big guys or your neighbor for the spray drift that's happening on your field, but that's only going to bring you temporary relief, is being able to blame somebody else for these issues. But in the end, you have to take responsibility and understand that there's something else that's deeper that's going on. Again, don't isolate yourself. Having depression or high levels of stress can really cause you to separate yourself from others, and you could end up making some rash decisions that could really affect other people in your lives as well. This is the biggest one for me, is don't just suck it up, and don't tell somebody to just suck it up and deal with it. Especially my grandfathers. It must just be, them as their personality growing up on the farm is, oh, you fell down, you scraped your knee, and you're sad about it, but get up, suck it up, put a Band-Aid on, and you're fine. You deal with it and you move on. But it's okay to understand that there's some other issues going on that need to be addressed. I wanted to actually tell you a little story. Again, this doesn't have to do with agriculture, but after I graduated college, I had the opportunity to be a nanny in Italy. How cool, right? It was actually terrible. I thought it was going to be the most coolest experience of my life. This time I was on my own. I was traveling on my own. I was going to this little tiny village in Italy, living with a family that barely spoke English. And I was going to teach these kids how to speak English, and I was going to make friends, and all of a sudden I was going to be, ordering coffee in Italian. It was going to be this great ordeal. And it ended up being really terrible. I actually fell into some really, really deep depression because I had no friends. I couldn't even talk to anybody, and I couldn't drive, so I couldn't go anywhere. If I wanted to go to town, I had to walk 40 miles downhill. It was insane. And so there was nothing for me to do. There was another nanny that came to that same village. She lasted a week, and then she left. And I was supposed to be there for 3 months. And I remember I called my dad. My dad is actually a family physician. And I remember bawling on the phone, like, I can't do anything. I can't go anywhere. I can't even talk to somebody. I can't see a therapist because nobody speaks English. I couldn't even get a prescription because my dad is a US doctor, not an Italian doctor, so it's not like he could prescribe something for me. And so I was in the suck it up mentality. And so I knew if I didn't get out of that situation fast, then it was really going to break me down further. And so I ended up just booking a flight, and I stayed for 2 months, and I told the family, I said, I need to go. And they were upset, but I think they understood the situation because of how isolating it was. But it took enough of me to be able to recognize the situation I was in and get out of it and get home and get the proper help that I needed. So I would say some techniques that worked not only for me, but also for that In a New Light program I was telling you about with the teens that were struggling with mental health, is being able to really find something that can help you escape from those things and maybe help you cope with some of those issues. Don't let it consume you, but just find something that you can channel your energy into something else to cope with those issues. And maybe if it's a spouse or a sibling or a child, is helping them find that little piece of joy that they can put their energy into. And for me, it was photography. And so when I came away from that therapy program, I took a lot of the skills that I learned there that even though we were teaching these kids, I was still learning too. And so I used that to take photography. And so whenever I would have a bad day or there was just something that was really bugging me, a lot of times you'll see me out in the field or out with my cows taking pictures. This one right here is one of my bottle calves. And actually I tell people all the time, I'm like, if you're having a bad day, come out to the farm and hang out with my bottle calves because they're so fun and they're cuddly and they'll just like run in between your legs. And it can be a really fun sense of joy is just hanging out with an animal. And so a lot of it is me out there hanging out. This was one of my other bottle calves after we fed him. I mean, he gets right up in your camera. And my husband, he loves fly fishing, and so half the time you'll see me just taking pictures of him fishing because there's so much beauty in something so small. It sounds kind of cheesy, but it's true, is being able to find that little piece of joy that can bring you a sense of relaxation and peace to cope with some of these issues. This shed actually is the bean shed. It's behind our office. This is where Harvey started. If you open up that door, you can see his handwriting on the door of conversions that he made. And so, you know, I've trudged through the tall grass and everything back there just to take pictures to capture a piece of history that's a part of the business. And through it, it was a sense of therapy for me. And I mean, I'm lucky enough for my job that I get to use my camera a lot and use video and photography to capture some of the things that the guys are doing. So it's really nice to be able to get out and do those things. Last but not least, here are some resources. Whether you need to take a picture of this or write it down, there are options that are available for Minnesota and Iowa. And it's specifically related to rural life and farm life. Both Iowa and Minnesota's hotlines, they're confidential, they're 100% free, 24/7. I know Iowa's can help with any legal concerns or financial issues. Minnesota can definitely help with any anxiety or depression situations, financial burdens as well. And then, of course, the National Suicide Prevention Line. I found this again on the CDC website, but they said farmers are an endangered species, and we need them because they give us sustenance to feed the world. So really, what are we doing to take care of them? And if we're losing so many farmers at the rate that we are, we need to do something to be able to change that and acknowledge that it's an issue and understand the signs so we know when to get help or help somebody get help.